When Nora got back from her 3-day medical conference in Phoenix, I was already at the kitchen table, sipping coffee from my chipped blue mug. The kind she once told me to throw out because it was too ugly for guests. But I'd kept it anyway. I could hear her keys jingling at the front door, her suitcase wheels bumping up the porch step. I stood up when she walked in, smiling out of habit, though there was a strange energy around her. Nora always looked sharp, but that morning she was casual. Leggings, a loose sweater, no makeup except for a faint trace of mascara smudged under one eye. She was tired, but smiling, her voice warm as she said, "Hey babe," in that same easy tone she always used after a trip. We hugged, and I caught a faint, unfamiliar scent. Not perfume exactly, something warmer, like cedarwood. She dropped her luggage by the door, saying she needed 5 minutes to decompress before unpacking. I offered to take her suitcase upstairs for her, the way I'd done countless times in the last 8 years. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, before saying, "Sure, thanks," and sinking onto the couch. Halfway through unpacking, I pulled out a folded piece of paper wedged between her clothes. At first, I thought it was just a receipt for dry cleaning or maybe a conference itinerary. But when I unfolded it, my pulse slowed, like my body was bracing for something. It was a printed hotel bill, not from her assigned room, but from the one next door. I frowned, scanning the charges. There it was in neat black ink. Extra key issued, 10:42 a.m. Late breakfast for 2, 10:58 a.m. Signature couples massage 3 p.m. Room 418. Nora's assigned room had been 416. I remembered because she'd texted me the first night saying the ice machine across from her room was as loud as a chainsaw. I stared at the bill for a long moment, my brain trying to find a harmless explanation before it even considered the other kind. I could feel the quiet weight of the house pressing in. When I set the bill aside, I noticed something else. In the zip pocket of her wallet, where she usually kept receipts for work expenses, was a hotel key card holder. The paper sleeve had a handwritten time scrawled across the front. 10:30 a.m. The room number? Same as the one on the bill. 418. My chest felt tight, like the air in the bedroom had suddenly thinned. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, before walking down with both items in hand. She was in the kitchen now, pouring herself a glass of water, the late morning sunlight catching the strands of her hair. "What's this?" I asked, placing both the hotel bill and the key card sleeve on the counter between us. She looked down at them briefly, her face neutral, too neutral, before her mouth curved into a small, almost rehearsed laugh. "Oh, that's just a mix-up," she said lightly, like it was barely worth a conversation. The hotel had some glitch with their billing. I was part of a group booking, so stuff got cross-charged. You know how conferences are, chaos. Her tone was airy, dismissive, as she leaned back against the counter. Honestly, the whole thing was a logistical nightmare. They kept giving people the wrong keys, printing receipts for the wrong rooms. I think half our group ended up with somebody else's breakfast on their bill. She reached for the paper, but I kept my hand on it. "You had a key for another room?" I asked. "Well, yeah, because they messed up the check-in," she said quickly, brushing hair from her face. "Some of us swapped keys around to fix it. No big deal." Her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "You didn't mention that when you called," I said. "Because it wasn't important," she replied, a little sharper now. Then her voice softened again. "Come on, Mark, you know how hotels are during big events. Half the time you're lucky if your door even opens. It's all just corporate expenses in the end." I stayed quiet, studying her expression. There was no blush of embarrassment, no startled defensiveness. Just this steady stream of words, as if she was walking me through a customer service complaint she'd filed before breakfast. She pivoted into a story about how the conference schedule had been shuffled, how a shipment of presentation materials arrived late, how she had to switch meeting rooms 3 times in one day. Her voice stayed even, animated in places, filling the space like she was trying to keep me from slipping a word in edgewise. She didn't ask where I'd found the bill, didn't ask why I had the keycard sleeve. Didn't seem curious at all. It wasn't until she drained the last of her water and started rinsing the glass that I realized what was bothering me most. Nora had always been the kind of person to over-explain small mistakes. She once told me the full 10-minute saga of how she accidentally left her coat at a movie theater. But here, with a couple's massage on a room she wasn't assigned and a key card in her wallet, she gave me less detail than she would about a missing grocery receipt. I stood there, one hand resting on the counter, watching her avoid looking directly at the items between us. And for the first time in years, I didn't quite believe her. The weight of that feeling, the thin, cold slice of doubt, was sharper than I expected. That night, after Nora went to bed, I stayed downstairs in the dim light of the living room, the hotel bill and key card holder sitting on the coffee table like evidence in a case I didn't know I was building. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that there were perfectly normal explanations for what I'd found. But the longer I stared at those papers, the more the last several months began to replay in my head. Not in the casual, harmless way I'd thought about them before, but in a new, sharper light. The first thing that came back to me was how she'd quietly disabled location sharing on her phone during her business trips. She'd brushed it off at the time, saying, "It's just a privacy thing." My phone kept sending alerts that were draining the battery. I'd accepted that explanation without much thought. Now, I wondered what exactly she'd been keeping private. Then there were the rideshare receipts. Twice in the last quarter, I'd seen them come through our joint email, a late-night ride to a boutique hotel downtown. Both times during trips she claimed were too busy for socializing. When I'd asked, she'd said she'd gone there for a team brainstorming session in the lounge because their conference rooms were stuffy. I'd laughed about how fancy her team's idea of brainstorming was. She'd laughed too, a little too quickly. Her fitness tracker had its own stories to tell, nights she said she'd turned in early, but her heart rate graph told a different tale. Sharp spikes at 11:48 p.m., 12:36 a.m., 1:10 a.m., the kind of readings I usually saw when she'd gone running or taken a spin class, not when she'd supposedly been lying in bed, exhausted from meetings. I remembered a dinner receipt I'd seen by accident, a bill for two at a restaurant we'd never visited together, tucked into the side pocket of her purse. She'd said it was a client dinner. That night, she'd come home smelling faintly of a cologne I didn't recognize. The scent was familiar now, thinking back to the moment she'd walked through the door that morning, the same warm cedarwood I'd caught on her scarf months earlier. I'd teased her then, saying she'd stolen someone's jacket, but she'd claimed it was just probably from the coat rack at work. I'd let it go. There had been smaller, stranger moments too. Times when she'd borrowed my car to just move it in the driveway, but returned the seat adjusted so far forward it barely fit me. I'd asked about it once and she'd shrugged, saying she must have leaned up to grab something. The pattern was clearer now, but I hadn't seen it for what it was before. Her browser history was another puzzle. Not that I checked it often, but every time I did, usually when I was using her laptop for something, it was spotless. Not even a stray search for a recipe. I clear it because it makes the browser run faster, she told me, smiling like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Then there were those recurring late-night calendar entries on her work account, always marked workshop after 10:30 p.m. I'd once joked that her job was turning into some kind of secret society with all these mysterious late hours. She just smiled, told me I was being dramatic, and changed the subject. One memory in particular stuck out. A Sunday in early March, when she'd been catching up on paperwork in her home office. I'd walked past the door and seen her quickly slide her phone screen down on the desk, a faint blush rising in her cheeks. When I asked if she wanted coffee, she'd said yes, but her voice had the brittle edge of someone caught off guard. And yet, at the time, I'd brushed all of it aside. I'd believed her, or maybe I'd just wanted to. Now, with that hotel bill in my hand, the pieces arranged themselves into something undeniable. Each fragment, disabled location sharing, boutique hotel rideshares, elevated heart rates in the middle of the night, mysterious dinner receipts, that persistent cedarwood scent, the adjusted car seat, the spotless browser history, the late-night workshops. They weren't random. They were a pattern. And once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. I thought back to the way she'd reacted when I showed her the bill earlier. No shock. No confusion. No real interest in how I'd come across something so clearly tied to her. Just a quick story about logistical mix-ups and corporate expenses, diverting me into a haze of irrelevant details until she could change the subject entirely. It was like watching a magician wave one hand to distract you while the other pocketed your watch. That realization hit harder than I expected. I wasn't just questioning whether Nora had been unfaithful. I was starting to wonder how many conversations over the past year had been some version of that same sleight of hand. How many explanations had been designed not to inform me, but to steer me away from the truth. The thought was like swallowing ice. By the time I went upstairs, Nora was asleep, her breathing even and soft. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at her the way you might look at a photograph you've suddenly realized was doctored. It was still her, but something about the picture wasn't real. And I knew, without fully knowing how, that the truth was bigger than one strange hotel bill. I didn't have to wait long for the truth to find me. It came from somewhere I never expected, from someone who didn't even know they were holding the last piece of the puzzle. 2 days after Nora's return from Phoenix, I got a call from David Greer, one of my longest-running IT clients. David's a straight talker, the kind of guy who never wastes words and never calls without a reason. We'd worked together for nearly a decade, but he'd never phoned me after business hours. "Mark," he said as soon as I picked up, "this is a little awkward, but were you in Phoenix last week?" "No," I replied slowly, glancing toward the kitchen where Nora was unloading groceries. "Why?" "I was at the Marriott for a conference," he said. "Happened to get the room right next to yours. Well, not yours, but—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Listen, I think I saw your wife." My grip on the phone tightened. "At the hotel?" "Yeah. Room 418. I only remember because they kept mixing up my key with hers." A pause. "There was a lot of noise coming from that room one night, voices, laughter. Definitely 2 people in there. Didn't sound like a work meeting, if you know what I mean." The air felt heavier, thicker. "You're sure it was Nora?" "I saw her in the hall the next morning," he said, his tone careful now. "She didn't see me. She was with a guy, tall, dark hair, wearing a lanyard from the conference. They looked comfortable. When I hung up, my hands were cold. I went into my office, closed the door, and sat staring at the carpet until my pulse slowed enough to think. I needed proof, something concrete that went beyond hearsay. My gut was already screaming, but I'd been in this limbo for too long to settle for partial truths. That night, after Nora fell asleep, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Marriott's online portal. I sent a formal request under the guise of billing clarification for all charges related to her stay, including key card access logs. Took 2 days for them to respond. The report was clinical and devastating. 2 key cards issued for room 418. First issued at check-in for primary guest N. Evans. Second issued at 10:42 a.m. on the second day of her stay. Multiple door entries logged from both cards, sometimes within minutes of each other. And there, tucked into the notes from the night David had mentioned, was a staff report. Guest complaint about excessive noise from room 418. Report states, 2 guests present. There it was, in black and white. I stared at the screen for a long time, the cursor blinking in the corner like it was waiting for me to respond. But there was nothing to say. The next day, I printed everything out, the incident log, the keycard history, the billing breakdown. I slipped them into a plain manila folder and left it in my desk drawer. Not because I needed more time to decide what to do, but because the act of filing it away felt like closing a door on the version of my life where Nora and I were still us. From that moment, the marriage was gone. Not in a dramatic explosion, not in a fight, but in a quiet, irrevocable shift. I remember sitting in the kitchen later that evening, Nora across from me, chatting about a presentation she was working on. I nodded at the right places, smiled when she looked up, and all the while, the folder in my desk felt like it was humming through the wall. I could see her mouth moving, could hear the rise and fall of her voice, but it didn't land anymore. The sound of her was background noise to a truth I couldn't unknow. She had spent the night with someone else in the room next door. And what struck me most, what cut the deepest, was how normal she looked. How easily she could slide back into our routines, grocery lists and email drafts and inside jokes, without a single flicker of guilt passing across her face. Or maybe it was there, and I just stopped looking for it. That night, when she reached for my hand while we watched TV, I let her fingers rest there, but I didn't hold back. The gap between us wasn't physical. It was something colder, something you couldn't see but could feel pressing in from all sides. I went to bed before her, claiming I was tired. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hearing her move around the kitchen. Drawers opening, the faint clink of a glass against the counter, the hum of the fridge. It felt like two separate lives were running in parallel, hers in whatever shape it had become, and mine, which was now a waiting game. Waiting for the right moment to act. Waiting for the moment when silence was no longer an option. But the truth was already here. I didn't need more evidence. I didn't need her confession. I had everything I needed, right down to the electronic timestamps of every time she opened that door for him. The only thing left was deciding what to do with it. The morning after I read through the hotel's access logs for the 15th time, something shifted in me. I didn't pace. I didn't rant. I didn't even wake Nora up to throw the evidence in her face. Instead, I sat at my desk with my coffee and opened a fresh yellow legal pad. If the marriage was over, and it was, then this was no longer about emotions. It was about logistics, boundaries, and control. I wasn't going to stumble through this like a man blindsided. I was going to act with precision. The first item on the list was health. I called my doctor's office before Nora even left for work, booking a full panel of tests. I didn't tell her. I didn't need to. If she'd been reckless with our marriage, I wasn't going to let that recklessness bleed into my health. Next came the finances. I logged into our joint bank account, my jaw tightening as I watched the list of charges roll by. Groceries, gas, the usual, but also those little hits of miscellaneous that now made my stomach turn. Lunches during her team days, boutique hotel bars, overpriced rideshares. I froze the account, redirected my salary deposits into my personal account. I called the bank to cancel the joint credit card, replacing it with one in my name only. Nora would find out soon enough when her next attempted purchase was declined, but I wasn't going to give her the courtesy of a warning. Then I pulled our household file from the cabinet, wills, mortgage, insurance, and took inventory. I photographed every important document, uploaded the files to an encrypted drive, and placed the originals in my safe. By midday, I'd rented a small furnished apartment on the other side of town. Month-to-month lease, no questions asked. The landlord barely looked up from his paperwork. I told him I'd be moving in within the week. I went back home, sat at the dining table, and opened a blank folder on my laptop titled Nora Legal. I filled it with scanned copies of everything. The hotel bill, the key card holder, the incident log, the access history. **TS of rideshare receipts. Bank statements with suspicious charges highlighted in yellow. A file of all her late-night workshop calendar entries. I wanted every piece in one place, ready to drop into my lawyer's hands. And I found a lawyer that afternoon. Someone who came recommended by another business owner I trusted. His tone over the phone was clipped, professional. "We'll build a clean case," he said. "No theatrics, just facts. When you're ready, we'll file." I was ready. That evening, Nora breezed through the front door just after 6, holding a paper bag from her favorite Thai place. She smiled like it was any other Tuesday. "Thought I'd pick up dinner on the way home," she said, sliding the containers onto the counter. I thanked her, my voice even, but I didn't sit down right away. She chatted about her day, the chaos of back-to-back meetings, how someone had spilled coffee all over the conference table. I listened without listening, my mind already in the apartment I'd be moving into by Friday. When she handed me my plate, I said, "I'll be staying somewhere else for a while." She blinked. "What? Why?" "I need space," I said simply. "And I don't want to share a bank account anymore." Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She stared at me for a beat before forcing a laugh. "Mark, this is ridiculous. Is this about that hotel thing again?" "I told you." I held up a hand. "Don't explain. I'm not asking for your side. I'm setting boundaries. Her smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching in confusion or maybe irritation. "You're overreacting," she said finally. "Maybe," I said, "but that's not your call to make." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression caught between disbelief and something colder. Then she turned back to her food without another word. That night, I packed 2 suitcases, enough clothes to last me until I could sort the rest, and loaded them into my car after she went to bed. I didn't want a dramatic exit. I wanted a clean one. The next morning, I met with my lawyer in person. I slid the folder across his desk, watching him flip through page after page without raising an eyebrow. When he finally looked up, he said, "This is thorough. We can proceed quickly." "Good," I said. We discussed property division, the advantages of filing before she could. We went over the legalities of freezing joint funds, securing my personal assets, and documenting everything. He explained the value of maintaining composure, how the court wouldn't care about emotional outbursts, but they'd care about records. Before I left, he said, "Mark, this will get messy for her. Be ready for pushback." I was ready. I'd been living in the mess for months without knowing it. That afternoon, I stopped by the new apartment and dropped off my suitcases. The place was bare except for the basics: a couch, a bed, a small table. No pictures, no personal history. It felt strange, but it also felt like neutral ground. A place where nothing had been tainted yet. When I got back to the house, Nora was in the living room with her laptop. She glanced up as I walked in, eyes flicking to the fact that my bags were gone. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She closed her laptop slowly. "And what about us?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Us is the reason I'm doing this." She didn't reply. I went upstairs, shut the bedroom door, and started making a second copy of the evidence folder. One for my lawyer, one to keep in the safe. Every click of the mouse felt like another lock snapping into place. By the time I was done, there was no going back. 3 days after I moved into the apartment, I got a phone call that turned the whole situation from bad to undeniable. It was early evening, the kind of cold spring night where the air smells faintly of rain. I was sitting on the couch, eating takeout straight from the container, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me swipe to answer. "Mark Evans?" the woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is probably awkward, but my name is Claire Mason. I think our spouses know each other." I paused. "You're Ethan Mason's wife," she said quickly, as if getting it out fast would hurt less. "He's the conference partner your wife spent time with in Phoenix." I leaned back on the couch, my fork frozen midair. "Go on." She didn't waste time. "Ethan's company is in the middle of an internal audit, and some expenses caught my attention. Charges for the same hotel your wife stayed at, same dates. His booking shows a guest access note for room 418. That's her room, isn't it?" "It is," I said flatly. Claire's voice wavered, but she pushed on. "I also found messages on our shared tablet. He must have forgotten it syncs. Dinner reservations for 2, comments about making the most of their last night before flying home. And photos just of the view from the room, but the timestamps match perfectly with the night David Greer overheard them." I rubbed my forehead, feeling that old, cold weight pressing in. "You're sure about all this?" "I am. I wish I wasn't." She hesitated, then added, "Mark, I don't think Phoenix was the first time. There are other hotel charges in the months before, different cities, same pattern. And you should probably check your joint bank statements." We hung up not long after, both of us thanking the other for what? For confirming the worst? For ripping the last shred of plausible deniability away. I sat there for a long time before opening my laptop. The bank's login screen felt heavier than it should have, like it knew I wouldn't like what I was about to see. Buried between our regular bills and grocery runs was a payment from our joint account, a deposit to a property management firm in a part of the city we almost never visited. The memo line was simple: studio, 1 month's rent. The date? A month before the Phoenix trip. I cross-referenced it with the firm's website. The address was a small, modern studio with floor-to-ceiling windows, tucked into a quiet neighborhood. I knew without a doubt that Nora had never mentioned it. The explanation practically wrote itself. The studio was for them. A local base when they couldn't get away under the excuse of work trips. I printed the bank statement and slipped it into my growing evidence folder. Then, almost without thinking, I opened Google Street View and pulled up the building. A sleek, unassuming facade. A lobby you'd walk past without a second glance. It was exactly the kind of place someone would pick if they wanted privacy without suspicion. That night, I drove there, parked across the street, engine off, lights out. I didn't expect to see her. I didn't even know if she still had the keys. But sitting there, looking at that building, I realized something. This wasn't just an affair of opportunity. It was planned, structured, hidden in plain sight, and that changed things. Because until then, a small, irrational part of me had wanted to believe Phoenix was a one-off. A lapse in judgment. But people don't lease studios for one-off mistakes. They don't arrange local hideouts for accidents. This was a second life she'd built under my nose. The next morning, I called my lawyer and gave him the new documents. We can tie her financial activity directly to concealing the affair, I said. This will work in your favor, he replied, flipping through the pages. Especially if you can get confirmation from the landlord or building management about who's on the lease. I nodded. I'll get it. 2 days later, I had it, her name, her signature, her email address on the lease agreement. The landlord was surprisingly open once I showed him my ID and explained she was my wife. She said it was for work, he told me, shaking his head. Didn't strike me as the type to, you know. I knew. I scanned the lease and filed it away. Each click of the mouse another nail in the coffin of our marriage. That night, I got another call from Claire. Her voice was steadier now, almost businesslike. I thought you'd want to know. Ethan's been asked to work under HR supervision for the next month. There's talk of a formal investigation. Because of Nora? Because of everything, she said. Apparently Phoenix wasn't subtle. Some people on his team saw them together. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. We talked for another 10 minutes, swapping what we knew. It was strange, sharing these ugly facts with a stranger who understood them perfectly. When we hung up, I realized I actually felt lighter. Not happy, but grounded. There was no more wondering. No more trying to read between the lines. The truth was out in the open now. And for the first time since I found that hotel bill, I knew exactly what my next move would be.